at 10 unlicensed, uninsured and whatever on the road.
Welcome to my dad's car. Enjoy!
Welcome to My Dad's Car, a podcast discussing our personal relationship with automotive nostalgia. And you know what? It doesn't even have to be about your dad's car. It can be your mum's, your grand's, your parents', guardians, or even a neighbour's. If it made an impression, let's talk about it. How you doing, Matt? If you can hear me.
I certainly can. Greetings.
Wonderful.
It's always a slight shock when it works.
Oh yeah, we've had a few where they've not worked. We're like, oh, this is going to be tricky.
So far, so good.
Good day.
Hello there, sir. How are you doing?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Indeed,
Excellent.
yeah.
Wow, first time. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Very good. This is a little bit unnerving for me because we record our podcast blind. We don't look at each other while we're doing it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Mainly because it can't be bothered to tidy up when we're doing it. But also it's an extra hassle. So we just normally find the quietest place in the house, in our respective houses, because we do it remotely. And then we just don't worry about what we look like. And we just have to remember not to talk over each other quite so much. It's easier with eye contact, actually. You can see when other people are going to say something. So maybe we should start doing that. But to be honest, with Max, my co-presenter, sometimes I just have to cut in to shut him up, really, because he goes off on one.
I think, for us with guests as well, it's quite nice. We've recorded, obviously, the video, and I've got all the video for prosperity in case, we ever become like the Beatles and it'll become the lost back catalogue of My Dad's Car Podcast. But we've no intention of putting them out because, people are in bedrooms and I've not done my hair and all these sort of things.
Yeah, it's too much faff, isn't it? It's too much extra hassle. And I think there's something intimate about listening to something as well, because I was saying to someone in the week that people have said, oh, why don't you do it on YouTube? I said, because there's something intimate about listening to that. When I'm listening to a podcast, I've got my headphones on, and I'm maybe doing something else or maybe sitting on a plane or a train, but it's just half an hour or 35 minutes, 40 minutes or whatever, just to lose yourself and concentrate on something and try not to look at a screen while you're doing it. Whereas with a YouTube thing, it's great, but you are looking at a screen. So you're not really, I think your mind's imagination is quite nice. I mean, on our podcast, we talk about we tire kick a lot. That's hence the name of the podcast, but we look at a lot of cars and the classifieds and describe them and talk about them. Now, that doesn't really make sense because the listener can't see them. But what we try and do is describe them so you imagine them.
Yeah.
And I think your power of your imagination is quite good sometimes. And then people say, well, what are the links? I want to look at the car as well. So I don't know. I just think, I come from a radio background. It's like the intimacy of radio. It's really nice.
Well, all the podcasts I listen to is when I'm working. I'm a gardener. So there are certain podcasts now that I associate with certain gardens, unfortunately. So if it's a garden I don't particularly like, I always sort of think, don't want to listen to that one.
It's a nice way to lose yourself lose half an hour, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And distract yourself from your everyday life, which is really nice.
Yeah. If you've got a podcast which you know is kind of like, I don't know, around about the hour mark in length, it's always good when you get to the end of it because you think, oh, that's 1 hour ticked off.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So, okay, we'll make a start.
Well, I'm sort of, I know, but that's what I was slightly, because this is other thing that you do that we don't do is we sort of like faff about for a while and then hit go and then try and act professionally. Whereas you go from the off, don't you? Which is it's a little bit unnerving.
Yeah, what we found is if we record it, then at least we've got it. And I heavily edit stuff.
Yeah.
So we are, we're joined today by Matt from the Tyre Kickers Podcast. That'll be an edit straight away.
That's easy for you to say.
Yeah. So welcome along, Matt.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I've just discovered your podcast while lying on a sun lounger in the Canary Islands, and I've really enjoyed it. I think nostalgia is, one of the key bits of owning a classic car, and listening to people sort of recount their earliest memories is really. It's kind of quite immersive because it does take you back, especially if they're of your era. You had Steve on a couple of episodes ago, and he was talking about the 80s, and I could see what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Petrol stations, what they were like. You kind of forget what driving and motoring was like, even as up until even the 90s. It was quite free and liberal driving. There weren't cameras and there weren't people sort of tutting at you as you filled up with fuel and that sort of stuff. It was just you filled up and you paid cash and you drove off and nobody knew where you were. And you could just get in a car and fill up a car with petrol and just drive off. Now you sort of, I don't know, it's a different world. So listening to people describing that world is really good. It's a really good angle for a podcast, I think, and it's something different. So I've been enjoying it.
Wonderful. Great to hear. Thank you. I listened to episode 9 this morning. So yeah, thank you very much for our shout out.
Sorry about that. Do you need some therapy now? Do you need help?
No, it's good. And I also noticed we've got, so the latest one we've got out at the moment is a chap called Dave Carey from Garage of Awesome, and you gave him a shout out as well. So it looks like he's kind of come over to have a listen. He's in Australia.
Yeah, very enthusiastic. Yeah, nice guy. He sent us some voice messages as well, which I said to my co-presenter, Mac, I thought it was some sort of booty call or something he was giving us, but he was describing cars, so I think we were all right. But yeah, any listener interaction is brilliant. And that's the nice thing about podcasts. I mean, I come from the world of radio, and that's how me and Max, the co-presenter of the podcast, met years ago. We've been mates like 30 years, and we met at Radio 1 in the newsroom. And the one thing that sort of got us together, well, there's two things really. One, how much can we skive in this job? And two, the cars. We've always talked cars, we've always chatted cars. But it's nice, the interaction now with this podcast and social media together. Social media gets a bad rap for a lot of things, but one thing it can do is bring people together. And it's been interesting and eye-opening for me to see, since we started doing a podcast, and you'll have found this as well, how many people there are on Instagram talking about cars.
Yeah.
You can fill your timeline with just people talking about cars, and every sort of cars, whatever niche you're into, whether it's classic cars, modified cars, whatever, you can find that little groove. I'm amazed how much classic car chat goes on Instagram, and how proud people are of their cars as well. So that's really good. And you get that interaction back, don't you? And I'm sure you guys do as well, from listeners and little snippets and that sort of stuff. So it's really nice to see that. And I think that's one of the nice things about podcasts, because you do sort of broadcast out into the ether, don't you? And you imagine what your listeners like, but it's quite nice to see them and interact with them.
Yeah, you're throwing something out there, and yeah, it's just a bit of an echo chamber, isn't it? Until someone has caught it and goes, "Oh, I've got it over here." Yeah, they've listened and then kind of return something back saying they've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll ask you, what's your earliest car memory?
Well, I've been giving this some thought. Obviously, having listened to the last few episodes that I have, I've sort of tried to work out what my memory was, and I have got a really, really strong memory. And I had to check this with my parents. They're both still around, so I was able to check it, although they went, did we have that car then? My mum had a green Mini, and it was one of the original Minis with the drawstring handles. And this is the memory. I remember sitting in that car. It was green on the outside, green on the inside, and it had the handles, and playing with the handles. And I probably was about 4. Back in the day, you relate to this. As kids, you used to play in cars. You used to play in your parents' cars, and they were quite happy for you to do it, mainly because there was no tech in them. I think you couldn't brake anything. As long as you didn't take the handbrake off, you were normally all right. And we used to play in cars a lot, and I did. But that's my earliest memory. A kind of an original Mini. This would have been like the mid-70s, but I think the car was late 60s. It had the drawstring handles. It had a number plate stuck on the bonnet. And I do remember that personally, and I had to check them. I said, have you got a photo of this car? And they said, no, we've got no photo of that car. So it is my memory of it. And they had it until my brother was born. He's like 4 years younger than me. And they had it just as he was born, and they got rid of it.
Okay.
So that's my first car memory of playing in that car. But the car that sticks with me was our first family car, and it was a pretty kooky one. While everybody else had Cortinas and British Leyland stuff, we had a Citroen GS Club.
Oh, okay.
The one that rose up. Like a DS, you started it up and it rose up. So it was a bit of a strange one. And I asked my dad this earlier, a couple of days ago. I said, why did you buy it? And he said, I wanted something different. He said, I always loved the DS. I didn't want a British Leyland car. I didn't want something that overheated. He said, you speak to your friends and they'd always be moaning about their cars and how, useless they were. And he said, I like the DS and I like the sort of enthusiastness of Citroens as well. So they went and bought this car in 1973, brand new, which was quite a big deal in those days. You didn't really buy cars brand new. And if you did, they were a lot of money, and you put it on HP, and it was a big purchase. You think now you could walk into a dealership now, can't you, and just slap a bit of money down and drive off in an Audi. It's not. So especially to buy something foreign as well was quite a big thing. So I remember that car, and to describe that car, it was a sky blue Citroen GS Club SPH 283M. It's funny what sticks with you, isn't it? Black vinyl seats which you stuck to in the summer. You're like. That were always hot.
Like unrolling a roll of gaffer tape, isn't it? To get your leg off the seat in the summer. Well,
of course, back in the 70s, we were all wearing sort of, it was like kids were dressed up in sort of almost vests, weren't they? Vests and shorts. And so you had a lot of exposed skin, and it was like, it was like ripping a plaster off.
Straight to the burns unit.
Exactly that. Yeah, especially if you got in it as well, because in Britain, we're not very good with extremes of weather, rather, we're cold or hot.
No.
So whereas you go to the continent and they have, they'll put the foil out on the dashboard so the car doesn't get too hot. Not in Britain, of course. If it's summer, just let the car heat up like an oven, put your kids in it. But that car, very kooky. You could drive it on 3 wheels if it had a puncher. But again, I remember playing in that car. It had a handbrake in the middle of the dashboard. It had a single spoke steering wheel. It had nice Velia dials, which actually were the same. I think they were the same ones that were in a Ferrari Dino, and that's where the similarity ends completely. But in terms of memories of that, we used to go everywhere in that. We used to go on summer holidays. We used to have family in Wales. We didn't go abroad a lot as a kid when I was a kid. So we used to go all over Britain, but mainly to go and see relatives. So down to the southwest or to Wales. I remember long journeys sitting in the back of that car looking out. And the one thing I was looking out at were other cars. And I'd always been into cars since a very, very young age. And I got to the point, and I must have been like 8, sat in the back of the car, just looking at cars and guessing what they were from the edge of them, or the lights, or the bumper, or, you play a game, because it was quite boring back in those days. You didn't have much to do, did you? So you'd play a game of, can I guess that car before I see the badge on the back?
Yeah.
And you'd sort of name the car. And we did have a range of quite terrible, but quite a lot of different cars back in those days. And they were very colourful, weren't they? Cars were colourful back in the days. You'd see a yellow thing, and what is it? I can guess what it is. So yeah, a lot of memories in that. A lot of memories of playing in that car as well. It had a Webasto sunroof that you wound, like in an MGB, you wound it and it kind of went back. And it was a bit of an odd car. As a kid at school, you were known for that sort of strange car. And my mum, bless her, she's got a great sense of humour. When you're at a difficult age, when you're at secondary school and you don't want your mum dropping you off, do you? That's the last thing. It's like, can you drop around the corner? Can you just I don't want to see you. And we get it with our kids now. It's like, can you pick it up around the corner?
My mum never drove, so it was never an option for me.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, my mum used to drive everywhere, but she'd delight in dropping me off at school and kangarooing the clutch, so that the car started jolting about. So people go, oh, your car really is rubbish, isn't it? But looking back, it was an intelligent choice. And again, memories and thinking about this as smart memories. Now, we used to go on holiday to all sorts of places. One place, I remember we went to the Isle of Wight once. And the one thing you could do with the Citroen, and my dad said it was a pretty reliable car. It was an air-cooled car. That's what he wanted. He didn't want a water-cooled car that overheated all the time. He wanted an air-cooled car. I can't quite see the logic in that, but never mind. But the thing he said, the one problem that he did have with it is the battery ran flat a lot. But the one thing you could do with that car is hand crank it.
Okay.
It was one of those cars that you could still hand crank. Well, it was almost a 1300 engine, so that's not like cranking an Austin 7. You've got to put your back into it. And I remember it went flat as we were trying to leave a campsite in the Isle of Wight.
Oh, no.
And he tried to crank it. Now, obviously, you put yourself in that position. Your family's, you've got kids moaning. You've probably got your wife moaning. You're stressed, you're tired, you've had a week away. You just want to get going. Your car doesn't start, which was quite a common thing back in the day, wasn't it? And people forget that. Your car often didn't start in the morning or when you're trying to get back from somewhere.
Yeah.
Mainly because you'd left the lights on or the battery, it was just unreliable, or the points or something. So he decided to crank start this car on the campsite, put his back into it, and the crank handle snapped in two and whacked him in the face.
Oh, God.
And I heard language that I'd never heard at that point. I was still quite young. He had blood pouring down his face. The car still wasn't started. And in those days, I think, people just didn't like... You did have the AA, but it wasn't like it is today. They won't, hop out and do your tyre for you. If your car won't start, you'd be waiting there for a few hours. So that's a memory I have of that car, of a swearing father with a half a crank handle in his hand, doing a Basil 40 on the car because it wouldn't start.
Bit of French language to go with a French car, by the sounds of it.
Exactly that, yeah. I think it was more Anglo-Saxon language I was hearing.
The Mini, was that sort of Mr. Bean green, or was that different shade?
No, it's more like it was more like I don't want to say pistachio. It was more like a sort of dusty, foresty green.
Okay.
As they were, I think, which is a kind of mini colour. I saw one actually. I went to the Haynes Museum and they've got one sliced in half. And you stand next to it, and I just literally, it comes up to my waist. It's just, and you can see inside of it, and it's such a small car. You forget, don't you, until you see a Mini up close again, one of the original ones. And my wife used to have. She was saying that they had a Mini Clubman, one of the original Mini Clubmans. 4 of them and a dog would go on holiday in that with all their luggage to Switzerland.
Unbelievable.
It's like, how the hell? I don't know if I could get down the shops in that now without, needing a chiropractor. But no, it was different. I saw one of those actually in the flesh, and it literally came up to my waist as well. And it's like, wow.
I was behind one of those recently on the road, and I had the kids in the car at the time, and I said to them, look at how small that car is. That's what things used to be like, because it just looked minute. It was so funny. Actually,
we dropped into Manor Park Classics on the way back from Liverpool a few weeks ago, and my son got into a Mini, and he's 13. He was absolutely the right size for it. I mean, we are all taller and bigger now than we were, but that's just what you had. I mean, even I've got a 60s classic car. I've got a Sunbeam Alpine, which is one of the few 60s cars I can fit in at 6'3". But even then, it's got laughingly what's described as a back seat, which you could probably fit 2 guinea pigs on. But kids would roll around in that. I mean, that's the other thing about back in the day. I mean, talking about your dad's cars, often no seatbelts in the back.
No.
Often you were like 4 or 5 up in the back with all your mates going to a birthday party. I had an uncle who had a Volvo Estate, which was a bit, back in the day, you were doing well if you had a Volvo Estate. And he had the seats in the back, which was fun to go in. Do you remember?
Oh, in the boot?
Yeah, they were backward-facing seats.
Yeah.
The vomit seats, yeah.
But, being the 80s, there's only 2 seats, but you can get 5, 6 kids in the back of that boot. No problem at all. Slam it down, sit still.
Yeah.
And I went to a car meet yesterday, and there was a Vauxhall Victor from the 60s, which had a bench seat in the front. And we were saying back in the day, you'd have been 6 up in that going on holiday somewhere. We're towing a caravan. And there'd be probably a child in the middle or balanced on a mum's lap or something with no seatbelt on. I mean, obviously, we look at that in horror now, but it's just the way it was. And, as long as you caught it when you crashed, you're normally all right.
We still do it for buses, though, to be fair. Like, you jump on a bus kind of around town and kind of mum's got a kid on her lap or whatever. Effectively, that's kind of what we were doing. Obviously, buses are travelling 20 miles an hour and stop-starting, aren't they? But that was a similar sort of theory back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know what you think.
Ram them in.
Yeah, ram them in. But I mean, it was sort of kind of overcorrected, I think, a little bit. I think there's a little bit of danger. My boy, say he's 13, and he comes out in the sunbeam. And he said his car smells of summer, mainly because it smells of petrol. But there's no airbags in it. You've got what's laughingly called a crash pad on the dashboard, but I think it would leave an impression in your forehead. And I was obviously driving this car, 1968, with a wheel that's made of metal and wood, which is going to leave a great big mark on my face. But I still drive it because I still want the enjoyment of doing that. I'll take the risk. It's like crossing the road, isn't it? You make the risk. You decide the risk yourself.
Yeah, definitely. What did your parents do?
Everyone, start your engines and visit Birmingham's NEC from the 8th to the 10th of November. Yes, it's the UK's premier classic motor show. Imagine over 3,000 cars to feast your eyes on, not to mention a record 330 vehicle clubs and hundreds of exhibiting companies. Shop for everything classic. You can even buy a car, meet motoring celebrities and experience all the action. Book your tickets at the NECClassicMotorshow.com and join our 40th celebrations.
My dad was a landscape gardener by trade, so he, as well as the cars, he also had some interesting vans back in the day. And those, again, you thinking in the 70s, people just didn't walk in and get a Transit on finance. They had to sort of be a bit more, money was tight as well. Money was tight in the 70s and the 80s as well. People sort of forget that. So he had a Bedford van, which he got. I think he said he bought it from the auctions with sliding doors. Do you remember the old Bedford vans?
Yeah, I think so.
And again, he played in that one, and all our mates would sort of jump in the back of it and, sort of muck about in the van. Don't take the handbrake off. Oh, take the handbrake off. Put it back on quick. Start rolling down the drive. But it had a column gear shift and sliding doors. And back in those days, people would drive those things with the doors open and jump in and out of them because they were doing stuff. So he had that. He then went for a smaller van, which was an ex-GPO van, which was the forerunner to British Telecom.
Yeah.
And you used to buy those at the auctions, I think. You used to get them cheap once they'd been sort of clapped out by the telecoms. And it's still, in a certain light, you could see where the stickers, the vinyls had been on the side. But he used to run around in those sort of things. So we had a family car and he had a car for work. My mum was a secretary in a primary school, which she did for a long, long time. And as I say, very confident driver, and she would drive everywhere. She wasn't fazed about driving. So we had those two parents who both did that, and we're both into cars. But I was mad into cars, and my parents could see that. And so I loved sort of mucking about in the van and stuff. So as a young kid, and I probably would have been about 6, they built a car shed for me in the back out of parts. Now, do you remember that? I'm saying back in the day a lot. Makes me sound really old. I'm only 52. I'm starting to sound like I'm in a care home. But in those days you could, and it was up until about probably 20 years ago. Do you remember you used to be able to go to scrapyards and climb over the cars?
Yeah.
If you wanted something, I had a Fiat Uno as my first car. Terrible thing. But I had to go and climb over some, what a surprise. It broke, pretty much as soon as I had it. So I had to go and climb over cars to get an alternator out or something. But he went and bought me the bits of a Bedford van. So I had the seat, I had the dashboard, I had the steering wheel, the column shifter, and a gearbox, and he put it all in a shed for me.
Oh, right.
So he made a car and then he stuck a registration plate. Thanks, Dad. It was really good fun. And so I had, and it's a shed that me and my friends would hang out in, but it had a car in it. It had a car. proper dashboard, seat, gearbox, everything. I don't think you could probably buy those now. You probably could on eBay, but probably somebody want a lot of money for them. But yeah, all that sort of stuff used to sit around quite a lot, didn't it? Cars got scrapped, and well, they didn't get scrapped. They got kept going a lot, didn't they? We probably scrap cars a lot quicker now. We crush them a lot quicker now. Whereas back in those days, you would have to keep them going. So you would use a recon gearbox, or you would even just use a second-hand gearbox out of something just to keep it going. So yeah, I had a car shed.
Just going back to scrapyards, I remember just going to scrapyards on occasion, it not even needing anything, just to sort of have a look around, because it was good fun, wasn't it? Because like you say, there would always just be something really, like say you went there in sort of early 2000s, there'd be stuff maybe from the 80s or 70s just kicking around, and just sort of nice to go and have a look.
Yeah, you took your screwdriver, didn't you? And you're allowed to just crawl over the cars and then just unscrew stuff that you liked.
Yeah.
Which was, yeah, again, it was like, oh my God, people look at that horror. Oh my God, you're climbing around cars stacked up on each other. But as far as I'm aware, I'm not aware of any friends who actually died in a scrapyard.
No.
So I think it was probably all right. Now everything's a bit boring, isn't it? Everything's labelled and tagged and put on shelves and put on eBay, which is handy.
Unfortunately, that culture of just taking a screwdriver has now sort of made its way over to people just doing it to cars on driveways and streets, isn't it? Just take your exhaust.
Yeah, well, talking of nostalgia, I saw a picture from the 70s or 80s of somebody spray painting their car on a London street. You know, they just masked it off and they were sat there with a rattle can. But that was quite a common thing of seeing people under their cars on the road, wasn't it? You know, and that doesn't happen now.
Yeah. We've had a couple of guests, haven't we, Andy, that their dads have done a few sort of...
Lee Sibley's dad did his van, didn't he, at the side of the road, I think.
Tin of paint and a brush.
But I think that's the other thing you did as well. And I think that's one of the nice things about having a classic car. Nice, is that the right word? One of the elements of having a classic car is you do have to check your levels and stuff. You know, I went on a long drive a few weeks ago and I thought, actually, I know I've had this service, but I do need to just check the oil's not leaking. All dripped out. If you do your oil, don't you? You do check there's a coolant still there.
Yeah.
And you just give the engine bay a once over and you do check you've got fuel. Which, you know, a modern car is pretty good at telling you what's wrong, but a classic car won't tell you it's wrong until it's wrong. Do you both drive classic cars? I can't remember whether you do or you don't.
I've got a 944, so 1986 944.
Oh, okay.
I've had old VWs kind of prior to that.
Okay, so you're no stranger to the hard shoulder then?
It doesn't touch wood. I've had the AA rescue me once. I had a water pipe which split. It split right near the end, and I tried to kind of cut it down and put it back on again. It got me halfway home and then it split. And we ended up getting rescued. But yeah, mystery noises, things like that. I've got a few of those. I always chuckle when people say, oh, we're going to get one of those like really old camper vans or one of those really nice VW ones and we're going to go down to Devon. You think, yeah, okay. Yeah, you're going to see the hard shoulder. Yeah. Somewhere near Bracknell. So good luck with that.
Very good at raspberry picking on the various bushes along the motorway.
Yeah, exactly that.
That's my day job. So I work for a VW and Porsche parts company. So yeah, I kind of spend a lot of time around people who have got old Volkswagens, and I worked in sales doing that for quite a while. And you get calls from people who have their engines broken like 5 miles from Dover. They can see the ferry, and they're in a hard shoulder, and the family are screaming, and you've ruined their holiday. There's a sound you don't hear much these days, apart from classic car things. The sound of a Beetle. They used to be quite a common thing. So hearing that air-cooled engine, you know, racketing down the street was quite a common thing because most towns had a few Beetles knocking about them. You know, somebody in the next street would always have a Beetle. And there's something about the sound of that engine, noisy as it is, that is very nostalgic, I think, to hear, which you don't hear. But it's nothing like a sound of an air-cooled engine. It's just totally unique, isn't it?
Seen a few old Beetles recently around my neck of the woods, strangely, just sort of coming out the woodwork. But yeah, I agree. It's a really nice sound, isn't it? You do see and hear one. Yeah, and it's nice. Well, they're self-ventilating Beetles as well because they've usually got so much rust in them that the air flows through and cools the engine down. That's how it works, isn't it? Is that the mechanics of it?
Yeah, ish. Yeah.
Ish, okay.
Obviously, you've got hot and cold zones on the engine. And
Max was telling the story of a Beetle he had on our podcast. He was talking about it and said it was so rusty that he once went to start it and couldn't start it. And he lifted up the back seat. And look, there was no battery, it just rusted. The tray had rusted.
Fallen through.
Battery had been left somewhere on the motorway or an A road somewhere.
Yeah.
I think if I was going to get involved, I don't own a classic car for the record, but if I was going to get involved, I think a Beetle would be something I would potentially look at as a candidate. Good headroom.
Oh, yeah. There's the two, isn't there? Which way do you go? Do you go for that classic 60s sort of slimline one or the sort of fat is it the Super Beetle of the 70s, the one that was with the big lights and stuff? I mean, both of those have got merits.
Yeah, 1303 was the later one. So it had McPherson struts. It was effectively kind of the forerunner to the Golf, really. So it handles a lot better. We sort of cheekily called them the fat lady at work. But yeah, they had the curved windscreen. Yeah, the earlier ones have got a flatter screen and a beam axle. So yeah, it is a mixture.
I think they make people smile, a Beetle. I think there's nothing quite like them. I think the interior, I'm a big one on interiors. I'm about the design and beauty of a car more than just, necessarily what's under the engine. But I think there's something about the interiors of a Beetle. It's very, very unique.
I like that dashboard.
The dashboard's great.
Yeah.
And just the design's great as well. I think it's a totally unique car. So it's a great classic car. I think it's one of those ones you have to buy with caution, don't you, about the rust. But if you can find a good one, or you've had one that's been restored, happy days.
Yeah, there's plenty of unfinished projects which could trip you up if you didn't go checking stuff. But if you know your way around a welder and you've got plenty of time, then you can still buy them quite cheaply. What do we need to ask you next? Any music from the journeys of your childhood?
I'm a bit too young for the 8-track. 8-track used to be in cars in the 70s, didn't you? And I think the problem with in-car entertainment in the 70s and 80s, that generally it was quite limited. And if you had something like an 8-track or cassette, you tended to listen to the same stuff over and over again. A memory's just popped into my head of my mum's car. So after the Citroen GS, they stayed Citroens, they got a BX.
Oh, nice.
Which is what I learned to drive in a BX.
Hey.
Get that in there.
Which were slightly strange things. But compared to the GS, it was like futuristic.
Yeah.
The first generation was probably a bit more kooky, actually. I don't remember the original BXs. They didn't have stalks for indicators. They had these strange pods that had the indicators on that rock a switch, and you needed to learn. It was like flying a plane. You need to learn where everything is because it wasn't very logical. So they had that. But yeah, talking about in-car entertainment, that had a tape player in. Auto reverse.
They have a flap to hide them.
They did have a flap to hide the tape player because obviously stealing the stereo was a sport back in the 80s and 90s, wasn't it?
Nothing to see here.
I remember we bought our first new car, which was a Volkswagen Polo, just skipping forward, in 1998. And within a week, somebody nicked the stereo out of it.
The rotters. Factory fitted Sony probably in that, I think.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't. But it cost a fortune as well. They used to charge you like £300 for it or something at the dealers. But yeah, no, in-car entertainment. So we had, in that Citroen GS, they'd have been a push-button radio, which would have had medium wave and long wave on it. So you'd have been listening to Radio 1, wouldn't you, on 275, 285. And then when the BX came, hey, auto reverse that had on a cassette, which my mum asked me to tape her favourite song, which was John Denver, Annie's song, which is a dreadful song. She said, can you put it on a cassette so it plays continually? And I said, you are being serious? She said, yeah, I wanted to listen to it every day, and I want to listen to it all the way to work. And she had about a 20-minute drive or something.
Okay.
It was almost like one of those cases, when a woman got arrested once for playing Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You at top volume in a flat on repeat, didn't she? And eventually the neighbour cracked and went and thumped the door down. So it wasn't like that. She was in the comfort of her own car. And I said, but Mum, are you serious? You want to listen to this song, not passing judgment on the song, but you want to listen to it honestly, like back to back, and then also reverse it back? Yeah. And she had that cassette in her car for about a year.
Jeez.
And literally, and when I borrowed the car, that was straight out. And I put some music in. Yeah, so you had a cassette in that. But you didn't really, as a kid, you didn't have much choice about what was on the radio. I don't have any strong memories about what we listened to in the driving down to Wales. It must have been something. It must have just been the radio. But I can't think. It certainly wasn't Radio 4. It was probably Radio 1.
Yeah, some people have memories of particular albums potentially, or kind of dad listened to football or cricket or whatever. But
no, yeah. So my parents were sort of mildly into music. Well, it wasn't a big thing, but you just didn't have a lot. You didn't have the choice, did you? Unless you were buying a very expensive car in the 70s, you didn't get a tape player in it.
What colour was the BX?
We had one in sort of a sick brown colour to start with. I think they probably called it champagne, and then 1988 came around, and hello, we got the facelift, which had stalks and was in bright red.
Nice.
And that rose up and down as well. And that's what I learnt driving. I learnt to drive in a Peugeot, actually. Peugeot 307, rubbish. But it got me through actually didn't get me through the test. I did my first test and that failed. And then I did my second test, and my driving instructor said, oh, it's in for a service. You have to drive my weekend car. And I said, what's your weekend car? He said, it's an Escort RS Turbo, and it had a massive whale tail spoiler on the back. Never driven it in my life, apart from my driving test.
Blimey.
I didn't get out of third gear on the driving test because this thing was sort of so pepped up that it wanted to go. So I don't even remember those RS turbos back in the 80s. They were sort of like the modern ST or even worse. You started them and they're like, and it's like, oh, shit, I've got to keep under 30 in this. I passed the test though, and had those little stubby indicators as well, really stubby, weird indicators.
Yeah.
I've never been a big Ford fan, each to their own, but I was never brought up on Ford, so I never really got into them.
That's a real test of the driving ability, isn't it? On the day of the test to say, you're not driving that car you've been learning in after all. Let's see how good you really are.
Yeah, it was a bit more gung-ho approach in the 80s. I was recounting a story the other day to somebody how my driving instructor fancied himself as a bit of a ladies' man, and I used to be doing my driving lessons, and it'd be the summer, he'd have the windows down, and he'd reach over, he'd beep the horn and wave at the girls. Right, girls? Ladies? I thought, oh, God, slightly creepy, but yeah, all right. It's not me doing it, it's him.
Did he have a shell suit and a large medallion and a cigar?
Oh, God.
No, we're in Surrey. We didn't have shell suits. He probably had a tash and a probably Pringle jumper. That's probably what he had on. But he fancied himself. I kind of got some memory of him being a bit more like Terry Thomas. Hello, girls, ding dong.
Yeah.
Beep, beep. You're not going to pull him in a Peugeot 307, mate. That's not going to happen. That's why he had the RS Turbo, I think.
Carry on driving lessons.
A little bit like that, yeah.
Do you recall any friends at school with cool cars?
Yeah, and I think there's always a friend that has the cool cars and knows about it. I had a mate, and I'm still in touch with him now, Tim. He always had Alfas. He had Alfa Suds. And from the moment he passed his test, he had an Alfa Sud. And I used to be able to drive that. And I looking back, I used to phone up a lot back in the days before I passed my test, the insurance brokers, because you had to give them a ring.
Yeah.
And I would go through, I'd literally try and find the hot hatches. And so I'd be phoning up and go, Lancia Delta. Yeah, how much? Oh. Yeah, no, third party. I don't want the fire theft. No, like cheapest you can do. 200. Okay. All right. Another phone about next week. It's like, Alfa Sud TI. How much is that? But I never got the money together to get one. However, he was a bit more organized. I think he worked through the summer or did something and pulled some money together. And he had a brown original, like first generation Alfa, which was great. And then he got himself some more money, got things together. He was very good with cars, very knowledgeable about cars. And he got himself one of the last ones. It was a 1984 red one, which he went through and sorted out. And that drove like a go-kart. That was super, super fun. The only problem with it is I've got quite big feet. I've got size 12 feet. And if you've ever driven an Alfa, especially of that era, they have like pencils for pedals, which are very close together. So... which, if you want to heel and toe, I suppose, is fine. You don't even need to heel and toe to wiggle your foot. But if you've got big feet, you have to drive with very, very small shoes. And it's also that Italian ape kind of driving position. But the Alfa Sud, he said to me the other day, he said, I wish I'd kept it. He said, I chopped it in for a Golf and I wish I'd kept it. And I've got vivid memories of that. It's a beautiful car. So I had that, and I had a mate with a Veloce Sprint, which was his parents' car, but he got the use of it, and that was great. So I do remember lots of friends who had cars. I had rubbish cars. In fact, that same mate came with me to look at the first car I wanted to buy, which I mentioned earlier, which is a Fiat Uno. He said, do not buy that car. I said, yeah, well, I quite like it. It's all right. It'll do the job. He said, look at it. It's a rust bucket. It's awful.
What colour?
Oh, black. The black Uno, and it was cheap.
Okay.
But there was a slight problem with the passenger door in being, when you shut it, the actual seal, the skin had split. And it was rusty, but I was blind to that. I was just blind. I thought, that's cheap. I'll run it. And he was right. Absolutely rubbish. It was the biggest pile of rubbish I've ever owned, ever driven. It was unreliable. It was rusty. It was terrible. But, you know, sometimes you buy these things with blind eyes and you learn over the years, don't you, to walk away. Yeah, but he had the cool cars.
My friend had a Fiat Uno. It was his mum's. It was a red one. And it had what they called the fire engine. I don't know what it stood for. It was called the fire engine. And he painted the bumpers red. I say it was red. It was kind of an orangey red. But memories of that, we were driving around. It's a bit of a sort of wasteland down near us. And trying to go around it as fast as we could. And if we were in the back, we'd open the opposite door to the corner to lean out a little bit to level it out.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
And that just kind of sprung back into my mind.
Yeah.
Definitely not very safe.
You ever see the programme 999? That sounds like something from a sort of era.
Teenage boys have fallen out of a car.
Yeah, Michael Burke.
Yeah, I think we had more sort of controlled fun. You know, I mean, I think back in the 80s, I remember there was a lot less houses about, so that you had more wasteland and stuff that you could donut a car around and stuff. I mean, now if I think I live in a town, and I think where would I go to sort of donut a car around? It's not a thought that comes to me every day, but you know, everywhere's sort of kind of built up now, isn't it? You know, even car parks have got too much stuff in them, haven't they? You know, car parks used to be just marked out and with a couple of street lamps and that sort of thing. Whereas now, they've just got stuff everywhere. There was a lot more where I was brought up in Surrey. There was a lot of army land and wasteland and that sort of stuff. So you could get your car up there and rag it around and, you know, it didn't bother anybody. But it wasn't, talking about learning to drive, that wasn't my first actual on-road experience. And again, this will horrify people who weren't around in the 80s. But when I was 10, I used to drive the Milkfloat. I used to help the milkman out on a Saturday. And being interested in cars, I said, you know, can I have a drive? And he said, yeah, go on then. And so I drove it and he said, okay, seems to get the idea of it. And I think when you're into cars, you sort of understand the physics of it, don't you? That was my first EV, actually. That's my first EV, driving at 10, unlicensed, uninsured and whatever on the road. And it was a Unigate Milkfloat. So it was one of those round three-wheeler Milkfloats. And it was automatic. You know, you plunked it on. And then it was a sort of step automatic. You could feel it go, dum, dum. So you rode the throttle then you came off it. Much like an EV now, actually. You know, it's a regenerative braking thing. So he let me drive it, and then every week I drove a bit more. And then every Saturday I drove a bit more. Eventually I was driving the whole round as a 10-year-old. And on one Christmas round, it used to be a tradition that the milk would pop in the house for a little tipple. And so quite soon he was incapable of driving the Milkfloat. So I finished the round off. But then he went in for another tipple, and the poor boy had a heart attack.
Oh, no.
So he had to be carted off in a stretcher. So I finished the milk round off, and I was about 10, 11.
What sort of time? What shifts were you doing?
Oh, wait, so it was a Saturday job.
Right.
Because I think my mum had said, oh, you know, do you need any help on the milk round? He said, well, yeah, I do, actually. And then, you know, I sort of used to get up and help him on a Saturday. He'd pick me up like the start of the round from my street, and then I would help him out, and then he'd pay me with a bit of cash and, you know, whatever sort of fizzy drinks I wanted off the Milkfloat sort of thing.
And a pop.
Yeah, it was, oh God, it was a Corona pop. I think it was. They couldn't sell that now, could they? But anyway, he had this heart attack and he got carted off in the ambulance. I finished off the milk round, which I think they were sort of all quite happy about it, but they just had to send someone out to pick the Milkfloat out. But because obviously couldn't drive it. I was driving around a housing estate, you know, you weren't actually on the main roads. So somebody came and picked the Milkfloat up, and then it was literally, I don't remember any kind of big drama out of it. I think a guy just turned up and said, cheers, mate. Do you need a lift home? Is your mum coming to get you? Yeah, all right. That's probably about 10, 11, 12 then.
That's madness, isn't it? Like, yeah, there must be a requirement for some sort of license to drive it. And then insurance and all the rest. But that goes back to having 7 people in the front of a car. Like, that's the time, doesn't it? It didn't matter.
I think even then it was probably way past the grey area. Can a 10-year-old do my Milkfloat for me? But just thinking about memories of cars, you also remember the cars on your street, don't you? And I remember my mate, everybody had quite average cars. You know, you had your British Leylands and you had your Fords. And everybody growing up in the 80s, every other dad had a Cortina, I think. Pretty much, unless they had a Princess or something. I remember going in a Princess, and do remember I was quite a polite kid. You know, I was brought up to be quite polite, so I didn't say this car is awful, but I do remember thinking this car is terrible with your velour seats and your wedgy front to it. Yeah. But there was always a car on the street that was cool, wasn't there? Somebody had a cool car. Now, my mate, his dad had a BMW 635 CSI, grey shark-nosed BMW with grey leather interior, and that was like, whoa. Because that would have been a very expensive car back in the day.
Yeah.
Not even the price of it. It's just cool. It didn't look like anything else. They only had him as a kid, so obviously they just thought, should we have another kid or a decent car? So they actually decided that was a better way to go.
Good call.
Yeah, good call. That's a good call. So yeah, the rest went on a car, but I do remember that very, very distinctly, that car. And I wouldn't say like turn me on to BMWs and maybe want one, but I just remember thinking that is the nuts. In terms of other family cars, I remember all my family cars. I remember aunt's car. She had a black Renault 14 and then had a Escort Ghia in the late 80s. And that was I say I'm not a big Ford fan, but that had all the stuff on it.
Yeah.
The Ghia came with all the stuff, didn't it? Most people drove poverty spec, didn't they? Or they drove the one above poverty spec. You drove an L.
The L, yeah.
LX.
If you were doing well at work, you got the GL because you were able to spend a little bit more money. And then there was the Ghia. And then the Ghia X later, wasn't it? Is that what you're referring to?
I seem to remember my brother having an Escort, which was an LX. I don't know what that was in the hierarchy, but...
I think that came on later. It made it L sound a bit more showbiz, didn't it?
Remember it had wet carpets. That's all I remember about that car.
I once traded an Astra in the 90s. I traded an Astra in for might be a Ford actually. And we went to lift the mats out because she thought, I'd have the mats. And it was wet under all the mats.
Ooh. It's usually like a heater matrix, isn't it? That sort of thing.
Yes. So the mats went back in. They got left there. And we ran away quite quickly. Yeah, but I remember my uncle had a Volvo, a red Volvo Estates, one of the nice Volvo Estates. And again, they were quite pricey back in the day. So they had good cars. But I remember this is really sad. I remember the door handles in those cars. Is that really odd? Yeah, it is. That's not right, is it?
On the Volvo Estates, didn't the door handle kind of open like downwards rather than...
You put your hand in it and it was like a stuck up. It was like a...
This is a 740 GL sort of.
Yeah. You reached into it and you pulled the lever back in the door, and then that's what opened it. And they had, and this was a big thing, and now we take for granted, they always went nuts if you didn't put your seatbelt on. Whereas in the 80s, people were a bit like about seatbelts, weren't they? Like, oh, I'm just going down the shops and put a seatbelt on. And most cars obviously didn't say anything, but the Volvos would literally do what cars do now, beep, 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 beep. So you always had to put your seatbelts on, and in the back as well, I think, because they were super safety conscious, weren't they, Volvos?
Yeah.
Very plush cloth inside those cars.
Very plush cloth, yeah.
Massive headrests on those, I recall.
They were quite hard headrests, weren't they? You'd probably have a bit of a headache if you did have to whiplash against them.
Yeah.
Oh, they did like plastic ones with like almost a ladder rung.
That's right, yeah.
And the one I remember had almost like a leather pad which went into it, which sat on top of it.
I think this was quite a posh one as well because it had the windscreen wipers on the lights as well.
Ah, yeah.
That was your mark of whether your car was a bit posh or not, whether it had windscreen wipers. That's another level, isn't it?
That's probably one of the first cars that had the headlamps that would come on all the time, wouldn't they? Or when you start up. I think that's because they're Swedish.
Yeah, they always drove with lights on. Yeah.
It's always dark in Sweden.
Yeah, it was.
My friend Steve, his parents had one, and when he passed his test, he used to poodle around in that and sort of ferry us around, which was quite amusing. And this huge Volvo. I always remember it being incredibly loud. I think it was like a 2-litre. And he used to absolutely thrash it. And you used to see this massive wagon being thrown around the village. It was quite funny looking back.
Yeah, and you think about it, as I say, they used to make lots of noises telling you to do stuff, Volvos. But we didn't realise at the time that was the shape of things to come in terms of cars bossing you about. I mean, now my daily car is really bossy. It's beep. You just want to switch it off. But in the old days, it's sort of cars didn't, and I wonder what it would like to be driving those sort of cars, because you had no idea what cars were doing most of the time. They're going to break down. The only thing you kept on, and this is driving a classic, takes you back to this, and I was explaining to my boy the other day what all the gauges were, and I said, you need to watch this one. That's your temperature. It feels quite your main one. Have I got enough? Is it working? And you were always the gauges were always fairly accurate, but not reliable. That's probably the best way to describe it. When you get into an old car, that says half a tank of fuel, but I'm sure it said half a tank of fuel when I drove it last time. So you're always a little bit suspicious. So you do that. But I was explaining to him, temperature gauge, oil pressure. You watch both of those, because if one of those starts going the wrong way, then you're going to be sitting on a hard shoulder.
You've got trouble.
Yeah, it is a different thing. In terms of just thinking about as well, back to cars, another memory of my aunt's cars and my relatives' cars. My aunt turned up once in one of the original Fiat 500s that she'd bought cheap secondhand in the 70s. And me being a car mad kid, I said, can I have a look? Can I sit in it? Can I whatever? She had to do a long drive back. And I said, is there anything you need doing? Do you need your windscreen wiper? Your washer fluid filled up? She said, yeah, I do actually. It's running a bit low. So I'll do it. So I popped the bonnet and I put probably 2 litres of water in, or a litre of water in. Would have been a gallon back in the day, wouldn't it? The thing was, it turned out I hadn't filled the washer fluid. I filled her brake fluid up with water. And apparently she had a little bit of problem stopping on the way back, which the enthusiasm was there. Maybe the knowledge wasn't. And since then I have checked, I think all the time whenever I fill washing fluid up, that I'm actually filling the right thing up. But I think, as a kid, you're very enthusiastic, and cars were much more visceral. And I think just one more memory, if I can squeeze it in, I think I remember my parents' car. But I would say, do you know what my strongest memory of a wow car? My parents had some friends who were they must have been fairly well off. We went round to their house and they had a Triumph Stag sat in the garage.
Nice.
Now, it was sat in the garage. It was a second car, I think, or it was a weekend car.
A toy. Yeah.
So it was in really good condition. I remember, and I must have been 6, 7 or something, being allowed to sit in that car in the garage and just, allowed to sort of take it all in. I've always wanted a Stag ever since, and I've come close so many times to buying a Stag. Been scared off so many times from buying a Stag. I've had so many moments where I've opened the bonnet on a stag and gone, ooh, no thanks. I've heard so many horror stories about owning a stag, but I saw one yesterday, actually. I went to a car meet yesterday and somebody turned up in a stag, and just the sound of that engine is great. But as a kid, I didn't realise how low rent the interior was, but I still remember it sitting in that garage, because garages smelt of petrol. Do you remember that? The garages do smell of petrol. And when I park my classic car in the house, the kids do say, "It's that smell." I said, "Yeah, well, you're not really meant to smell it. It's supposed to not be there." But you don't notice that with modern cars. Cars don't really give off much of a scent, do they?
I think petrol and damp bricks they smell of.
Yeah. And there was always a bit of oil as well, wasn't there? Mixed into that, because that was obviously dripping on the garage floor. But when the garage door went up, you got that smell.
Yeah, the rush.
It was like Oda classic car. Whereas I think if you park a modern car in a garage now, you don't get any real scent of anything. And so it's quite an emotive thing. So that stag, I would have been sat in the garage smelling the fuel. It is a nice smell.
Yeah.
And it's one of those smells, once you smelt it,
There's no getting away from it. It is a nice smell, isn't it? Yeah.
it's something but fresh petrol.
Yeah.
You had a guest on a couple of episodes ago, Steve, who was talking about, Steve, wasn't it? He was talking about the 80s and petrol stations and working in a petrol station. And they used to smell of petrol. Now you go to a petrol station. Actually, it's changed a bit because people are filling up petrol more. So they've got that waft back. But for the last 10, 15 years, everybody's been filling up diesel, haven't they? So there was just spilt diesel. Doesn't smell very nice. But petrol stations used to really smell of petrol. Garages used to smell of petrol. And cars used to smell of petrol as well.
Men used to smell of petrol.
Men used to smell, I was to smell of petrol. And I smell of petrol when I drive my old car as well. Sometimes I get in.
Dab a bit on your neck.
Yeah. Well, no, you sort of seem to carry it with you, especially with a convertible. It seems to sort of carry. And sometimes I come in and it's like, oh, yeah, that's definitely 99.
I genuinely smell of it a lot because my work equipment is petrol driven. So
of course, yeah.
Quite often it just fumes onto me and yeah,
the smell, the petrol strimmer or something. That's proper.
Exactly. Yeah.
Almost like two-stroke. There's a thing that doesn't happen anymore. Two-stroke used to be a nice smell.
Yeah.
Oh, the smell of two-stroke, especially at a race circuit.
Yeah, or even just a scooter going down the road.
Mr. Khan wouldn't like two-stroke at all, would he? If he got a
no, he would tax that, wouldn't he? Burning petrol and oil at the same time. But there's a sound. We talked about the Beetle, not hearing Beetles, but you don't hear that ding, 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 ding. And you used to hear that quite a lot in town centres and stuff. Scooters went up to the lights.
True. Yeah,
and scramblers as well.
Yeah, but they're just noisy, those scramblers, aren't they? But the waft of a bit of petrol is nice. I do like. It's one of the things I do like about cars. There's sort of a limit to it, though. You don't want too much. It's a bit like aftershave, isn't it? Just a little bit, not too much.
Yeah, we're not endorsing this. We're not suggesting you go around sort of
petrol sniffing old
exhausts and stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and if you do, go for E5 because it's got a bit of a stronger flavour to it. So this E10 stuff for the ethanol, it's not quite the same. Momentum 99's got a nice sort of old-fashioned petrol smell. I have to put the lead additive in when I fill up as well. So
okay,
just to give it some extra petrol smell.
Cool. Thank you very much, Matt. I think it's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah,
it's been really good fun to hear all your stories.
Thank you, because you've got all those memories in there, but it just needs a little bit of prodding to get them out. If you could come back in about 20 years when I'm rocking in a wingback chair in a care home and not really remembering who I am and what I'm doing, and try and ask me these questions again, that'd be really good. If that's all right. It just might get the grey cells going. Just ask me about the Milkfloat.
The petrol sniffing probably would have gotten the better of you by then, Matt, I reckon.
Well, it probably will. Yeah, probably will do. No, but thank you. That's been really fun. It's nice to go back, and it's quite nice. One of the things that's the side product of this, I was able to talk to my parents about cars as well, because they're not massive car people. But my dad got quite excited about talking about buying that Citroen GS and why he bought it, and he said he always used to like the fact that when he took it to the garage, they were always really interested in fixing it. In the right way. He said they were enthusiastic about it. The guy, one of the mechanics, was a race driver for Citroen, and they just were really nice and enthusiastic. He said when he used to take his other cars elsewhere, they were a bit, "I'll park it there, mate. We'll get to it in a minute." So it got him excited about it, and it was quite nice to talk to them about their memories of cars as well. So it's been a good trip down memory lane, as old people like to do.
Good,
wonderful.
So thank you for the invite.
No, not a problem at all. Yeah, thank you very much, and keep doing what you're doing. Best of luck with the Tyre Kickers podcast.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers, Matt. Nice to meet you.
Cheers, guys.
See you later. Cool. A long one, that one. But good.
Was it? What time is it? Oh, yeah. That was a good chat, wasn't it? Enjoyed that.
Yeah, some good stories. A Mini in there. Citroen, was it GS? And then some BXs. You've lost the £1 coin on the jar.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard. I did drop a key into a glass.
Oh, no, it didn't come up.
Oh, that's a shame. I'll drop it in now, see if you can hear this. I've just knocked the glass over now. That's You hear that?
No.
There you go.
But yeah, good to have him on. His podcast is a good listen. And nice to see a few of our kind of previous guests interacting with them as well, getting on board and supporting that. So
yeah, definitely.
That's cool to see. BMW Sharknose 6 Series. I think they've come up a few times.
Yeah.
Pretty timeless. I think everyone's sort of in agreement. That's a cool car.
Yeah, definitely. I remember those dropping to sort of rock bottom prices at one point as well, sort of 5-6 grand, and amazing really to think that they get to that point, but they did.
Indeed.
That's always quite nice when a parent or parents, they go for some more sort of, what should we say, risky choices of the family car. Like sort of going French completely goes against the grain, doesn't it, really, in this country at that time?
Yeah, nice to make those choices. I think it's a bit like we've had some people on with Saabs, haven't we, in their background. I guess maybe the Volvo was sort of a safe choice, is a bit of a terrible pun, but that was kind of the thing, wasn't it? But yeah, Saab and Citroen was, a little bit more of a considered choice. You'd have to hunt out the dealership, wouldn't you, for a Citroen or for maybe a Renault or a Saab?
Yeah.
It's not just at the end of your street, whereas actually like every town had a Vauxhall dealership and a Ford dealership and a British Leyland or Rover or whatever. So, you had to do a bit of work, I think, if you wanted one of those.
Yeah. That's a nice touch, though, that the Citroen dealership, they're actually showing an interest in fixing the cars and that sort of thing. I don't know, I guess back in the day, they were just sort of, all the French stuff was seen as being a little bit, like the build quality obviously was always sort of brought under the microscope, wasn't it? And I'm not too sure about reliability, that sort of thing, but I don't know, they did seem to be sort of tarnished, didn't they, by their reputation a little bit. It was a risky sort of thing to go for.
Yeah, I wonder whether it was kind of Citroen was maybe an arty choice or something like that, where you've got sort of Volkswagen was sort of associated with like a hippie movement, perhaps, and maybe like the camper vans for sort of bands and things, maybe. And then, you've got your Saab perhaps for the sort of engineer or the designer.
Yeah. But when you look at like old, I've never owned a Ford personally, but anyone that I know that has, they've never been particularly reliable from memory. So I just sort of think, everyone was buying these Fords, but why in a way?
I guess it's convenience. It's like, I guess
true.
The corner shop of car purchases. It's at the bottom of your road.
Yeah.
Go and get one, and then if it's rubbish, you probably chop it in a couple of years and get another one and hope that one's a bit better.
True.
I guess of that time as well, that even if you bought a brand new car, like Matt was saying, like it still wasn't massively reliable in the 60s or 70s.
No.
It just... it was one of those things, but things would go wrong with it. And it was just par for the course, whether you had an old one or a new one. And each time you got a new one, I guess it became a bit more reliable till we get to the point where now it's almost like just getting on an escalator or an elevator. It just takes you there, and unless you sort of get a puncture or something untoward, then you're going to get to where you're going.
Yeah. I suppose back in the day, that's why if you could afford to make the jump to an Audi or a Merc or a BMW, you were sort of not guaranteed, but you were definitely in with more of a shout of not having issues mechanically. But obviously that came at a cost, didn't it?
I think similarly with Japanese stuff, to be fair.
Yeah, true.
I think obviously, Toyota, your Datsun or Nissan or whatever, Mitsubishi, etc., sort of built their reputation on that reliability. They were very plastic heavy, weren't they? Especially in that time. But my nan, for example, did a spate of Toyotas, and I don't think they caused her any trouble. They just kind of go on and on.
It's funny how the elderly sort of got involved in the Jap market, isn't it? It seemed to be a bit of a thing, I think, like cherries and sunnies, all that sort of thing.
Maybe they were all advertised between Countdown.
Maybe, yeah.
And 15 to 1 or Gardener's World or something. And they came in this Telegraph supplement. We'll have to get one.
Werther's Originals, standard stair lifts, Toyota.
Toyotas. And then, obviously they had a good salesman. They must have done.
Yeah.
Let me get you a cup of tea. Come and sit down here with a biscuit. Put your feet up.
Slippers. Yeah. Slippers as you enter the dealership.
Yeah. Okie dokie. We'll wrap it up and on to the next one.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, John.
Pleasure.
And roll the credits.
Thank you for listening to My Dad's Car. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please support us. Buy us a coffee and subscribe. And tell all your friends.